Greetings, class. In this installment, we're going to look at the question, why does working for peace matter? And I'm going to give you four different answers to this, right? And you should think of this as kind of a sales pitch for the class, even though at this point, I really hope you're invested in it. But four different ways of approaching it. And so the first one I'll say is that we're going to look at the micro, and then we'll look at the macro, and then we'll look at the personal, and then we'll look at the professional. So the micro and macro, right? Just we hear this in lots of different disciplines, probably more often than not at kind of the economic questions of life. My answer won't be so economical, although I do think that there is a benefit to peace studies in an economic sense that we'll talk about in the professional part. But so the story goes, a person is on the beach and they're saving starfish, right? They're grabbing the starfish from the drying sand and tossing them back into the water. And the little boy walks up and he's curious and he's like, "What are you doing?" And the person says, I'm saving these starfish, right? And the boy says, "Well, what do you mean?" And the person says, "Well, the tide comes in and the starfish end up on the sand here, but when it goes out, these starfish, they end up, they'll get baked and dry out and die by the sun. And so I'm saving them." And then the boy grabs some and starts helping, right? And after a few minutes, the boy's like, there's so many starfish, right? Like the whole beach is full of them, right? And why do you bother? There's no way you can save them all, right? And the person says, "Well, I might not be able to save them all, but it matters to this one, right?" And so I like to start from kind of that small distinction that peace studies matters because it changes lives, right? We might look out at the world and, people will have debates about whether or not war is inevitable, if we can save humanity, these big picture details. There's certainly a lot to look at in the world that's discouraging. Forces of greed and violence are present if you turn on the news on almost any given day. It can be quite depressing. So if we can't stop the conditions of the world, but we can make the difference for, even a single person, I say it's worth it because it makes a difference in that person's life. So I'll tell stories, I think that stories are a great way to, again, make these video clips more personal, and to really kind of connect in that storytelling experience. And in the classroom, there's a way to feed off the energy of people's reactions and get the questions and so forth. But one of the things that I talk about a lot, and I know that sometimes people get tired of my stories because, I've had reviews on Rate My Professor where students have mentioned that I talk about my experiences in Sri Lanka too often. I worked there. It was a very important time in my life. It was following the 2004 tsunami in the Indian Ocean. And I worked on a number of projects, but with my first, I'll say deployment for lack of other words, but I went there, my first trip for working in Sri Lanka was for 84 days. And one of the things that I got involved with was an organization called Light Up the World. And we were putting solar-powered lighting systems into relief housing along the Sri Lankan coast. It's great. These little 6-watt lights would be the difference between, cooking in the dark and not. And, that might not be like the difference between life and death, but a little bit of comfort would go a long way. And I've had a chance to go back, and people really did appreciate the difference that made in their quality of life. Anyway, at one point, there was two kind of village communities that were so close together, and the organization had enough solar lighting systems to do this village, but then there was a few extras. But the debate about using the extras to help some of the other people was problematized in part by this behavior that was, pretty natural, that if you do something for one person, then other people would like for you to help them as well. And there wasn't enough to help everyone. But at one point, there was a specific man I talked to with the help of, a translator / interpreter. He'd lost 32 members of his family. He was the only one in his family that was left. They literally, drowned to death. They were killed when the waves came through. And it hit me particularly hard that we didn't give him a solar-powered lighting system because he was illegally tapped into some power lines that sometimes when the power was on, he was able to get electricity. And so a determination was that we wouldn't give him the lighting system because he had too much. That's the end of the story. I mean, I actually don't know what else happens with him. But that moment from 2005 of a person who's lost the entirety of their family having too much has always really stuck with me. Anyway, that's a micro example, right? We make policies, or the organization was operating on the macro level, the big picture, that if something's over the threshold, then no, right? If you qualify, great. If you don't qualify, no. And there was no provision, just absolutely nothing about the situation that was like, we'll make an exception in this case. There was nothing about the system of determinations, and I've just never forgotten that. Anyway, he was getting by. He appreciated that people cared. He was thankful to all the volunteers from around the world who'd come through, and there was a lot of aid. There were different things to help add comfort to his life, and hopefully, he was able to get connections, but there's no replacing the loss of loved ones. Anyway, so the micro study of peace, the micro study of conflict is really just a look at individual people, and in some cases we could just look at individual students. What is going on in a specific person's life, and it's worth an examination of the peace and conflict, because it can make a difference. Even if it only makes a difference for one person, it can be worth it. The macro part, on the other hand, I think is something that we focus on because we change one relationship and we can change the world. I have been teaching for over a decade now, and my students are better and do more for the world than I'll ever be able to do. The teachings have a ripple effect, and when you can change someone's life, and I get a chance to change lives because teaching people about peace and conflict will impact them in their futures no matter what they go on to do. Whatever you do in this world, you will do it better by having a more sophisticated understanding about how you can manage the conflict and peace in your life. Right? And in some classes, I have things like community service learning projects where I have students volunteer in order to write a paper about their experiences. During a 7-year period, I had over 1,000 students who volunteered at least 10 hours, and you just think about what that does for the world when you're able to multiply things by being able to impact change. Whatever it was students decided to do, to learn through, to experience in their communities, I got to do something, right? 1,000 students doing 10 hours, that's 10,000 hours of volunteering that I got to make a difference in. Right? That's a lot of 40-hour work weeks. You put them together. You change the world when you start getting into this. You might not see it immediately. You might not get to experience that thing like the proverb says, peace is people planting seeds for trees that they'll never get a chance to sit in the shade of. So micro, macro peace studies is important because we change individuals and we change the world. Personal and professional. So personal, I don't like to share too many of other people's stories, but I've had dozens of students tell me that simple things that we talk about in class have made dramatic impacts in their personal lives. I've had students tell me that strategies that we discuss in peace studies and conflict resolution classes have even done so much as to save their marriages. That things that they're just not being able to communicate about with their partners, that they figure out how to make sense of it, have that conversation, and that by reaching that understanding, that they can make things happen in their relationships that were missing. Like, you can have dramatic impacts. I'm not saying that I can promise that a class can save a marriage. I'm just saying that students have said that has happened. Sometimes relationships don't work out. And, that's another reality in life. And I'm not saying that anybody has ever told me that this class helped them go through a better breakup. But I'm just saying, like, the understandings about peace and conflict in your own lives can help you to reach better outcomes and to strengthen and improve the relationships you don't have. But it might also work out that you might see that you deserve better. And sometimes an awareness that you deserve better is a good thing too, right? Conflict is an opportunity is one of the things we teach. Sometimes you have to ask for more. And sometimes when you decide that you are worth more, that you do deserve more, getting a no ends up being a red line. That could be in a personal relationship, but it could also be in a professional one. And that's the segue here to the professional life. Whatever you do, especially if you use this as the springboard to getting the certificate in peace and conflict studies, which you could then put on your resume, tell future employers that you have training to handle or to better handle conflicts in the workplace or with customers. This is professional training. I have worked in so many different industries. I mean, everything from delivering and making pizzas to doing ski instruction and being a lift attendant to working in oil fields. I've taught at every level from 5 years old to, graduate level in college. Conflict is ubiquitous. Conflict is sometimes not even really conflict, but misunderstandings. But it's everywhere. And when we can tell employers, when we can tell clients, when we can talk to people, when we can figure things out, when we can do these things, when we employ these skills, it has professional benefit. We'll talk more about that. You'll think more about that. Maybe your final papers will be more reflective about conflict in your workplace or prior workplaces and how those lessons can translate to improvements in employment or future employment. But there's a lot of professional benefit. You know, you get an angry customer and they might push your hot buttons. And you might learn in this class a little bit more about dealing with your own hot buttons and establishing your own inner peace. And by not taking the bait or getting triggered by the hot buttons, you might be able to make the difference between losing a customer and losing the sale, but also potential future sales from that customer, right? Sometimes it is the people who are the regular customers who are the most demanding and have the greatest expectations, right? But there's an opportunity cost in losing that customer. And if you lose the customer on the basis of something that actually you might be able to better communicate or better control, then, you have that benefit. But it's just one example of many. The more we can see interests and values and positions for what they are, the more that we can talk to people about the problems we engage with them. And the more we can figure out what our possible strategies are, the more solutions we can offer. And by being able to offer potential solutions to customers and employees and people in the workplace, the more likely we are to produce positive outcomes. Anyway, peace studies can do a lot of different stuff. And it can do a lot of different stuff for you. If you take it seriously, it can do stuff. If you just let it sink in, it can do stuff. Class will change your life.